Hi, I'm Susan Brubaker-Knapp, your host for season 2400 of Quilting Arts TV. One of the things I like best about art quilting is that it encourages you to examine things closely and learn about them, to experiment with techniques, materials, and themes you might not otherwise consider, and to explore new options for your art. In this season of Quilting Arts, we introduce you to artists who have taken their work in different directions by working with unusual materials. On today's show, we feature painting and printing. Nanette Zeller experiments with painting cheesecloth and using it to add texture in a naturescape art quilt. Then we'll learn about silk screening and how Patty Kennedy Zafford uses it in her work. She covers her process, copyright issues, workspace, and background dyeing. It's all coming up next on Quilting Arts TV. Nanette Zeller uses hand-painted cheesecloth in her work to create beautiful texture. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. I like to make naturescapes, and you think of walking through the forest and seeing the forest for the trees. That's sort of where this came from. I like to look really close, grab my audience with the big picture, and then have them get in closer and look at the mossy underground of a naturescape. And so I use cheesecloth to do that. And cheesecloth is a gauzy material, that very open weave, that you could pick up at a cooking supply store or a hardware store where the paints and stains are. And depending on the manufacturer, the weave is different. And I have an example there that shows a very open weave and a very tight weave.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter like what type of cheesecloth you're buying, if it's in the grocery store or the hardware, it depends on the manufacturer. So you really have to look at the packaging if you want a particular weave.
Okay, you have to collect it.
Collect it, and that's what I do. I just grab it when I can get it, and I have a good variety, as you can see from my pile over there. So cheesecloth, it comes in these little mini bolts, depending on the manufacturer how much is in there. And when you open it up, you can see that it's 4 layers worth of fabric that's in here. And so when I'm starting to paint my cheesecloth, I pick up a big chunk of it. Usually it's about 12 or 24 inches, and I open it up into these smaller pieces like I have over here.
Okay.
And to start with, what I do is I stick it in some clean water and just let it soak up the water for a while. So we'll
do you spread it out and scrunch it or anything, or do you just?
Well, just right now, it's just, I want it to get wet. And cheesecloth is 100% cotton, so it's just like when we're using quilting cottons, it likes to absorb color very easily. So I use just acrylic paints, and I have some paints for us to play with here. I'm glad you're going to join me in doing this. So you could use craft paints, you could use soft body acrylic paints. It really doesn't matter. Whatever you have on hands, water soluble paints is what we're using.
Okay, and about how much should I?
And I just put like a little dab. I use 3 colors when I start, just so I could get some blended effects into my cheesecloth when it's finished. And so just lay the 3 little blobs of paint down, and then I take some clean water with a spoon, take about a half spoonful of water, and I split the water up between the 3 blobs and use the base of the spoon to kind of blend it. And I don't want to blend it really well. We could put our spoons
so blend
here.
all of them in?
Yeah, into one big puddle, and you could see it pools, there's chunks of it.
Kind of like that?
Yeah, so there's chunky bits and colors all blended together. And then we go to our wet cheesecloth, and we're going to wring out as much water as possible. Now, if you wind up getting paint on your hands and you get paint on the cheesecloth, it's okay, but that's just going to add more dimension to the piece. And we're going to open it up just a little, not spend a whole lot of time in opening it up, and just lay it in the puddle. Okay. And push it down, and you could see that it starts getting color in it. And depending how much cheesecloth you're using and how much paint you use, it may have bits of white in there. And you could see a lot of my samples here don't have a lot of white. If you want to leave it that way, just let it dry that way. Or you can take it and just squeeze some of the water out of it, and the paint gets more distributed, and we're going to leave that on our trays to dry. And you can see you get some really interesting color paint. That's really cool. And so that's how we paint it. It's going to take about 24 hours for that to dry. So we'll take our gloves off and we'll move on to the next step.
So look at all the beautiful colors you got over here too. All different colors.
Yeah, yeah. I just have play dates where this is something that you could get your friends over, just paint cheesecloth all day, and that's when I'm working on a quilt. I'm like, you know what? I need to put some ground cover in there, and I have a big sample of colors that I can pull from. And so the cheesecloth, when it's dry, is really kind of stiff and crunchy, is what I call it, and I just open it up. And sometimes some of the paint is still dry in there, and it's really crunchy. So I'll roll it up to try to loosen up some of those paint drops.
Okay.
And I start opening it up, and I cut on a diagonal. It's important to cut it on a diagonal because it's more stretchy that way, just like the bias of a fabric.